very much. As Aaron mentioned, today I'll be talking about the population structure and spawning dynamics of cod in the Gulf of Maine. As we just saw from Graham's presentation, as many of you are probably aware, since 1972, cod were managed in U.S. waters as two stocks, the Georges Bank stock and the Gulf of Maine stock, which is essentially the waters north of Cape Cod. The most recent Gulf of Maine stock was most recently assessed in 2012, and it was determined that the stock was both overfished and overfishing. As you see in the plots on the left in the upper panel, spawning stock biomass has actually been below the BMSY target and it's been overfished the entire time series back to 1982. And overfishing has been occurring, as you see in the bottom, fishing mortality rates above the FMSY proxies, also overfishing the entire time series. So therefore, the stock faces persistent difficulties in rebuilding. And as Ted touched upon, the plots on the right show a history of the resource from the NOAA Northeast Fisheries bottom trawl survey catches. You can see a general contraction of the resource into the western portion of the Gulf of Maine, and a depletion and lack of rebuilding of cod along the coast of Maine here. So looking a little finer scale at the population structure, the map on the bottom shows this from Ted's 2004 paper. He mapped the historical cod spawning sites, which are shown in red, and based upon the relative degree of reproductive connectivity and overlap, divided them into 4 subpopulations. So the schematic at the top will help visualize that, where picture the stock as a metapopulation. You have separate subpopulations among which there's limited connectivity, and within which there's multiple spawning components, where they cod have a higher degree of spawning site fidelity, similar to what was once believed to be rather unique in salmon, where they home to their natal rivers to spawn. It's becoming increasingly evident that many species show homing to their spawning sites, and cod is, we're learning, is no exception. Is one example. So the cod show a high fidelity of these spawning sites, and there's these semi-discrete spawning components within each subpopulation. Unfortunately, today, nearly or more than half of these spawning components have been depleted due to overexploitation, habitat degradation, and decline of forage species, as Ted was talking about. So this has resulted in declines in productivity. We have fewer decline in abundance, fewer individuals, fewer egg production, and also it's compromised the stability of the stock, whereas we're now literally putting most of our eggs into fewer baskets. So we've increased the vulnerability of the stock to environmental influences. We've decreased the likelihood of a match between the time and location of spawning and positive environmental conditions for the survival of eggs and larvae. Additional mechanisms that contribute to the formation of this population structure, other than spawning site fidelity, include temporal variation in spawning, where there's spring and winter spawning components that are genetically distinct, and also different dynamics in larval dispersal and retention between the eastern Maine and western Maine coastal current, where some eggs and larvae are retained locally or transported long distance depending upon the season and day. So myself, along with my collaborators in the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries, we've been studying a remnant cod spawning component in northern Massachusetts Bay, just south of Gloucester, known as the Spring Cod Conservation Zone. We've been studying these spawning fish since 2009, and during the first year where we most intensively began our work in 2010, we captured some video with the drop camera at 170 feet, and this video shows ambient light of the cod spawning aggregation. As you see, it's also referred to as a haystack of cod. Cod stack multiple 5 to 8 meters off the bottom. These large adult spawning fish, many of them over a meter long, 20, 30, 40 pounds, aggregated there during the day of spawn. We came back a week later and did the same thing. You notice there's some very large whale cod, large females in this video in the spawning aggregation. So we've been studying this aggregation using a variety of techniques, many of which we heard about today. Genetics samples, otoliths, morphometric photos for Graham, hydroacoustic surveys to try to estimate the biomass, but also a variety of tagging technologies. And shown here are 2 examples of electronic tags. In the upper left is an archival data storage tag. This archives data on depth and temperature. We release it on the fish, and then we're relying upon a recapture from the fishing industry, recover the tag, and download the data. We use this information to track the fish's movement away from the study site. On the study site, we track their fine-scale movements using surgically planted acoustic transmitters. These emit a low-frequency sound signal, which is listened for, detected, and recorded by a series of acoustic receivers. An example of the acoustic receiver is shown in the upper right, and shown here is a schematic of our array from 2010 to 2011. The small dots represent acoustic receivers. There's 28 of them, 400 meters apart, and they can listen and detect tagged fish for over approximately 1 kilometer. So that cloud is about 10 square kilometers, among which we can detect the fish when they're tagged with these transmitters. This is a rather unique application of this technology, where it's a positioning system, and when each tag is emitted, the sound signal is detected by at least 3 receivers, so we can triangulate the fish's position within that 10 square kilometer area. And what this results in is a GPS latitude and longitude positioning of each tagged fish every 5 minutes or so within 5 meters of error. And you see that gravel bar that's pointed out. That's where the females tend to aggregate. That's where we get most of our tagging and sampling. And this next animation basically sums up a lot of our results in one animation. This is a 24-hour clip of the data that we collected. It consists of behavioral patterns between 2010 and 2011. It shows day and night. It's bright and dark to signify day and night. You see the females form an aggregation and aggregate around that cobble bar, and the males form a separate yet adjacent aggregation out to the west and north. And much of our observations are consistent with what has been published about cod spawning behavior, which is often referred to as lekking, where you have these male territories and the females move in when ready to spawn. So this technology is very helpful for us to gain this fine-scale and detailed information on cod spawning activity in the western Gulf of Maine. And as I mentioned, it's largely consistent with previous observations from holding tanks and observations from other studies using trawl surveys and other monitoring techniques, where you have the territory of the male. The female moves in when she's ready to spawn. The male tries to attract the female by producing sound with their swim bladder, performing circling bouts around the females, and fin displays with their dorsal, ventral, and pelvic fins. And then spawning is under female mate choice, and mating pairs rise off the bottom, and you have the broadcast release of sperm and eggs. So therefore, males are thought to be more active while spawning. You see they move around more in these territories, and they display to attract mates. Egg production for the females increases with length, diet, temperature. So larger females produce larger eggs that hatch into larger larvae, have greater survival. So the larger, older fish are important for their reproductive contributions to the population. There's also varying reproductive success amongst the males. Larger males are more dominant, and they attract more females and greater number of spawning events. And then it's commonly assumed that a fish, once mature, spawns every year. Although skip spawning, where mature fish forego reproduction, is common in many cod stocks. It has not yet been examined in the Gulf of Maine. This is a potential area of right research, because in other stocks, anywhere from 10 to 50% of mature fish forego reproduction in a given year. So this has great implications for estimates of recruitment for a stock and for our long-term rebuilding if fish are not reproducing each year. So there's many aspects of cod spawning dynamics that can influence their vulnerability to overexploitation. You see many of these spawning sites that are mapped are very close to shore. They're predictable in both space and time, and the duration of a spawning event. We've tracked individuals for an average 5 weeks, and spawning occurs for about 2 to 3 months in the locations that we've been investigating. So this seems to be like a conveyor belt of fish moving in and out. And also they form dense aggregations, and you see spawning occurs over relatively fine spatial scales. Some other potential aspects to consider influences of fishing on spawning aggregations is that it does more than remove biomass. Since these spawning components are semi-discrete, they show a high degree of fidelity with relatively low degrees of connectivity. You can serially deplete each component, which is largely what we observed along the coast here in the Gulf of Maine. It's been observed in other cod stocks throughout the North Atlantic. You can also have longevity overfishing. If you move commonly the largest individuals or adults are aggregated to spawn. If you move the largest individuals, which are believed to spawn for a longer period of time, you can also alter the duration and timing of spawning by just contracting to a shorter time period. Shorter time period then can reduce the likelihood of an overlap with positive environmental conditions. It can also potentially disrupt this complex spawning behavior, which I believe Mike will touch upon a little bit after me. You can potentially shift the operational sex ratio, where typically fishing near a spawning aggregation, you catch mostly males. And as you saw from the animation, the females hold in a smaller area. They're typically harder to find, and mobile gear typically catches more males than females when you're near a spawning aggregation. So just some broad summary. The Gulf of Maine stock appears to be can be described as a meta-population, where it's not a homogeneous unit. There's many multiple semi-discrete spawning components, and that the cod exhibit spawning site fidelity, prevalence fine-scale spawning site fidelity with complex spawning behavior. And this information on population structure and spawning will be invaluable for informing future fishery management decisions, which is a segue into Mike Armstrong's presentation following mine. And, I guess we'll hold questions until after all presentations.
Great.